Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm going to give you a report on the first couple of 100 rounds through this gun right here. This is my Galil Ace Gen 2 and 7.62x51 NATO. It's also compatible with 308 Winchester. That doesn't work with all guns, but with this particular design it does. I've gone over the details of that in previous videos, so I'm not going to rehash all of that here, what makes it compatible with both cartridges. But suffice it to say that a lot of foreign design guns will oftentimes have that compatibility, whereas American design guns will not always. Sometimes they will, but not always. As to how it's shot, we first need to discuss the ammunition that was used, because that always plays a part of it. So the vast majority of the ammunition that I put through it, and like I said, I only put about a couple hundred rounds through it total, but most of that, like a good 180 or so, 180 rounds or so, was this stuff right here. This is the Wolf Military Classic, 308 Winchester. It's foreign made stuff, so 308 Winchester and 7.62x51 NATO are basically synonymous in other parts of the world aside from the US. So it's basically designed to run in either one, but it's labeled 308 Winchester, and this is what the 145 grain full metal jacket. And we'll go ahead and take out a round just so that we can take a look-see at it. I did not open the box prior to filming, so it took a little bit here to get a round out. But nothing terribly fancy, it's just standard steel case ammo. Nothing overly fancy at all. And with this stuff, I found its performance in terms of reliability to be very nearly perfect. There were no malfunctions in terms of not firing when I wanted it to fire, but there was a small hiccup with the side plate on the gun, the little side shutter that's meant to keep dust and debris out. I'll discuss that in more detail, but it didn't not fire at all. So, yeah, like I said, it fired just fine with the standard steel case stuff. No hiccups that way. And then the other ammunition that I put through it was this stuff right here. This is the PMC Bronze 308 Winchester, basically soft point, very basic hunting round. Probably wouldn't want to use it on super big game because it's not really all that great that way, but smaller animals, you know, deer and that kind of thing, it'll be okay. Not probably what you'd want to use on elk and whatnot. It's not a super great projectile in terms of holding together and whatnot, so it's suitable for hunting-ish, but not overly great and not what most people would call a very high value round. You know, definitely not high performance in terms of hunting rounds, but could be used, you know. All right. Get that open, and we'll take a look at what these rounds look like. Standard brass case ammunition, of course it is soft point, so you got the normal soft point there. And like I said, this is not a super high quality hunting round, but this is definitely more of a hunting round than, you know, full metal jacket steel case would be. So I put about 20 of these through it. I don't have a ton of these, so I didn't have a ton to use. So I put about 20 of these through the gun, and it worked just fine with these, and I kind of had them interspersed between a bunch of different magazines, and I used the Magpul magazines, the 10 rounders, 20 rounders, and 25 rounders from Magpul, and they all worked just fine. However, in contradistinction to what I was hoping for, none of them lock the bolt back. Instead, what happened is that the follower got overridden by the bolts and actually cut a small chunk out of the follower on the magazines, and so it doesn't lock the bolt back. And none of them locked the bolt back at all once the gun was actually operationally working at its true operational speeds. And so, yeah, none of them locked the bolt back, but I kind of suspected that that might be the case anyways, and most AKs, they don't lock the bolt back anyways, so, you know, kind of the thing there. In terms of accuracy, I might have already mentioned it, but in terms of accuracy, these ones, the steel case ammo, gave me about a 6 or 7 inch group at 200 yards, so 3.5 MOA. And granted, the optic that I have on the Galil, it's just a 3x prism scope, and so it's not an overly precise scope anyways. And like I said, most of the ammunition is the cheap steel case stuff, so I don't really expect it to be super accurate to begin with. And so 3.5 MOA for cheap, generic, plinking ammo. I'll accept. The PMC bronze was pretty close to the same, maybe a little bit tighter. Instead of a 6 or 7 inch group, it was maybe more like a 5 or 6 inch group at 200 yards. So, still definitely deer worthy. But at the same time, not going to be the round that you're going to want to choose if you really want long distance performance out of it. These rounds here are very generic rounds, and they're not really high precision type rounds. So in terms of the maximum precision that you can get out of this thing, frankly, I don't know, and I probably never will, just because that kind of ammunition is pretty well outside my price range in terms of buying it in any kind of bulk. And for the way that I shoot, if I can't get it in bulk, it's not usually very useful to me. So probably not ever going to really stretch this thing out to its maximum potential, unfortunately. But that is basically how it's shot in terms of reliability. Every time I wanted the gun to go bang, it did. So no issues that way with the steel case or with the PMC bronze. And those were the only 2 types of ammo that I had out there. I'm sorry, I really wish I could have tested more, but budget concerns and things like that kind of prevented any of that from happening. So yeah, that's a problem. I did mention that there was an issue with the shutter on the side, and you guys may already be able to see it, but you can see that the shutter is actually lifted out from the gun just a little bit, and it's not supposed to. What it's supposed to be is like that. It's supposed to be basically flush with the dust cover. And unfortunately, it doesn't do that anymore whenever you cycle to action. So it's flush now. Go ahead and cycle to action. And you can see that it actually overrides the dust cover now. The reason why it's doing that is because I reversed the spring on the inside that holds the dust cover in these little, I'm going to call them buttons, for lack of a better term. But there's a little piece of spring steel, bent spring steel on the inside that holds the shutter and these buttons in place, and I actually reversed it 180 degrees. And the reason why I reversed it 180 degrees, now it holds this a little bit more loosely and it comes away from the gun, which it's not supposed to do. But the reason why I did that is because these buttons kept falling off when it was in its original configuration. And of course the buttons would fall off and then the shutter would start getting floppy, and that wasn't ideal. And so my fix out there at the range was basically just to take the piece of spring steel, flip it around 180 degrees and reassemble this structure right here, which was relatively easy to do. It's not overly hard. That's the nice thing about AKs. AKs are big enough on the inside that you can usually do a lot of stuff in the field pretty easily. And so that's what I did, and flipped it around, and now the dust cover actually stays on the gun when the gun cycles, which is kudos. But like I said, it comes away from the dust cover, and now instead of sitting under it like it's supposed to, now when you cycle it, it rides over the dust cover just a little bit. I'm not sure why it didn't stay together when it was in its original configuration, and this thing has been out on at least 3 different shooting trips now. Like I said, I haven't put a ton of ammo through it in those 3 trips, but I was playing around with that dust cover a bit. And like I said, the first time I went out, had the buttons falling off, and so flipped it around 180 degrees. Got it home, got it taken apart, and kind of reworked that spring, that little piece of spring steel, that little wire piece of spring steel a little bit, trying to get it to hold on tighter to the buttons and whatnot, and reassembled it the original way. And it seemed like it was staying together when I would manually cycle the action, and everything was fine. Went out on the second trip to the range, and after a few shots I started getting the same problem again. The little buttons would start popping out again. And so I did the same field expedient, result: take apart the gun, flip the piece of spring steel around 180 degrees, reassemble the thing like this so that it overrides the dust cover, which it's not supposed to do, but at least keeps it on, and finish out the rest of the shooting session like this. Basically, like I said, now it stays on just fine. It just comes out too far, but that's how I ended the second shooting session. And the third one, I just left it in that configuration because, you know, I couldn't figure out what was wrong with that piece of spring steel, what it needed to be changed to. And when I flipped it around 180 degrees, it stayed together, and that was kind of the goal there. Like I said, in terms of actual malfunctions, of it not firing when I wanted it to fire, it was perfectly fine. But this little shutter assembly did fall apart a couple of times, and reversing the spring, the wire piece of spring steel, fixed the problem in terms of, you know, pieces falling off the gun. But now it overrides the dust cover a little bit, and that's not ideal. It's workable, but it's not ideal. That's the only issue that I've had with it, though. Everything else about it has been just fine, and I will say that I am actually really growing to like the Handguard especially. Initially, I wasn't a big fan of it because it does add a lot of forward weight. However, when you're shooting it from the bench, which is what I typically do, this is not exactly a gun that I would consider to be a running gun anyways, and those of you guys who know me know that I'm not exactly a running gun guy. It's just not the way I am, and, you know, my stomach and physique would show that to be the case as well. So it's mostly from the bench that I'm shooting this thing, and this Handguard is really nice to work with from the bench. And just because you can, you know, place your bag anywhere under this that you want, unlike a normal AK, that is usually just this part of the barrel assembly that's basically right next to the receiver that you have to work with. That's where you have to have your support. But on this one, because it has such a long handguard, you can move the bag around quite a bit without causing any issues. And it is not technically a free-floated handguard in the very strict sense of that word, like, you know, a bolt precision gun free float. It's not quite like that, but it's free-floated enough that, like I said, it doesn't really matter where the support is on this thing. It's not really going to affect your point of impact. So I very much like it in that regard, and the fact that it is kind of heavy up front when you're shooting it off the bench is nice, because all that forward weight kind of helps keep the gun down, and so you don't get a lot of muzzle rise off of it. And even if you're holding it, you know, offhand, you're not using any support, you're just firing it from the shoulder. And by the way, that's what offhand is. It means that your hands are what are supporting it instead of the ground or table or something like that. Sometimes people think that offhand means left-handed if you're a right-hander, but that's not what offhand means. Offhand means you're shooting it off of your hands. If you want to talk about your non-dominant side, either say non-dominant side or simply your weak hand. But offhand is not weak hand. That's two different things. Offhand refers to how you're shooting the gun. That is, not off the ground, not off of a bench, not off of a bipod, off your hands, so basically from the shoulder. Weak side, though, refers to your non-dominant hand. Alright, so I really like the Handguard now. Like I said, initially I wasn't a big fan of it, but I am now. Gives you a little bit more play in, you know, your precision long-range shots. Not that I shot any precision ammo out of it, but performed well enough and wasn't sensitive, which I like. And also it gives you a bit of extra weight up front to help keep the muzzle down. It is still a very heavy gun, though. Like I said, it's a heavy handguard. And relatively heavy barrel and those kinds of things, and there's, you know, no cheating with physics on that. It's still a heavy gun, but that forward weight does have some advantages. It's not all bad news. And then I continue to like these 3X prism scopes from Primary Arms. This is one of their cheaper models. They have smaller 3X prisms now that are also a little bit more expensive, and if you want to minimize what you have on the gun, that would be a good thing to at least think about. But what I like about these big 3X prism scopes from Primary Arms is that the things are very sturdy, they're relatively low cost, and the reticle in them I like a lot. This is actually the 7.62x39 reticle, and I like it because it has a very big chevron, and if all you're doing is basically point blank shooting and point blank zero, that nice large chevron is very easy to work with and very nice. I absolutely love that. Of course, if you're a precision shooter, you're going to want a different kind of optic for that. If you're looking to reduce weights, this is not a low weight optic by any means. This thing is like a pound just by itself. So take that into account. But the 3X Primary Arms prism scope has been working wonderfully. The mount from their 2x prism scope also has been holding together quite well, and so that is not a big issue. I mentioned in the past that I'm not a big fan of the stock that they have on the Gen 2 Galil Aces. That remains true. I'm still not a big fan of it, but it is workable. I will say that that actually was a little bit of a disappointment, though, in that the way that this stock operates made it hard for one of the people that was out there shooting with me. Just because this is as collapsed as it gets, and the length of pole on this, with it as collapsed as it can get, is 13.5 inches, which is considered basically the length of pole that would be applicable to the average size man in America, which I think is 5'9", I think is the average now. So it's basically designed for someone who's 5'9", which works out pretty well for me because I'm 5'9". But there was one person that we had out there shooting that was considerably shorter than me, closer to the 5-foot side than the 6-foot side, and this length of pole was just a little too much for them to really get good eye relief on the optic as it was set up. Now this optic is fairly generous in terms of its eye relief, and so she could kind of make it work, but it definitely was not ideal, and that did show up in her ability to hit the target. She couldn't hit them quite as well as she could with other guns. Her percentage of misses went up with this gun versus others. So that is still a little bit of an issue. Having a 13.5 length of pole be your minimum length of pole on an adjustable length of pole gun is not a good idea. That just doesn't make sense. Now, in terms of maximum capacity, if you pull it all the way out, it has a length of pole of like 16.75 inches. And I did out the math on that, and that would be like someone who's over 7 foot tall. Like I said, this stock would make sense if you were giving these to, you know, NBA players and trying to arm all of them. But for the regular population, this stock really does not make sense. It is too long, and it doesn't go short enough for some people. It's not truly an adjustable stock, because like I said, most people are going to wind up leaving it here, at least people who want to, you know, use a magnified optic and work with the eye relief of a normal magnified optic. So yeah, that really still is kind of strange. But like I said, it went bang every time I wanted it to. That I can't ding it for at all. I have grown to like the fact that it is a little bit front heavy. Like I said, it keeps it stable in terms of, you know, not having the muzzle rise too much. It also is very forgiving in terms of where you place the support underneath the barrel, because the handguard will account for pretty much anywhere that you want to go just fine. Yeah, so like I said, the stock just doesn't make sense. It did keep one person from really being able to use this gun well, just because I can't collapse it any more than this. 13.5 inches of for the length of pole is as good as it gets. So that's a bit of an issue. And then, like I said, the buttons on the shutter did pop out a couple of times on 2 different range trips. I solved it by reversing the spring steel inside, and now it overrides the dust cover, but at least it stays together. So not completely without issue, but at the same time, and I don't know how well it's coming across, but at the same time, I really like the gun. It shoots well. It really is a smooth shooter, and it's just hard to kind of express how that is. But in terms of recoil, it's not bad. It's more than a standard 7.62x39 AK for sure, because it's, you know, 308 Winchester. So there is a little bit more of a push there. You can't cheat physics too much. But the heavier front end with the brake on the end actually really does mitigate most of that recoil pretty well. So on all of the shooters that I've had shoot it so far, didn't find it to be a terribly punishing gun in that regard. Not much different from normal AKs that I have that they've fired. So it's a good general gun if it wasn't for that length of pull issue. But most people can at least handle the recoil on it. And like I said, it performs. You know, it fires every time I wanted it to fire, even, you know, using basically the cheapest ammo that I could find. It still works with it just fine. I will say that its ejection pattern, though, is very erratic. I mean, it throws the brass everywhere. You know, the right side of wherever you're shooting is just going to have brass in all kinds of places. It definitely does not leave it in one neat pile, but like I said, it never actually failed to shoot. Every time I wanted it to go bang, it went bang. So weird ejection pattern, but it does work. It also does ding up the brass pretty bad, and you can see that in other videos on YouTube where they take a look at the brass, and a lot of it is dented on the side. I'm getting the same thing that way, so it's not really a good gun for reloaders in that regard. And, you know, it's going to make you do a little work when you go to clean up after yourself after you get done shooting. And for those of you who use public land like I do, please pick up after yourself. I don't like having to pick up after you. Okay? You're adults, at least the vast majority of you. Pick up your toys. Okay, but in terms of performance, it is basically everything that I expected it to be. And it's really shooting quite well, and I just enjoy having it. Like I said, I nitpick things, and you know, there's plenty of things that I can find not to like on pretty much any gun, but on the whole, I really do enjoy it. And like I said, I don't know how well that's going to go across, but I really do enjoy this gun. And like I said, pretty much everyone that I've had shoot it has liked it, with one exception, because the gun was too long for her. But pretty much everybody else has enjoyed the gun, and that is always a good sign. Alright, thank you guys for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, I would pray that you would go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.